Hello and welcome. The Portavood Institute for the Study of the Iranian World welcomes you to another episode of our podcast, Legacies of Ancient Persia. Join us as we further explore the many legacies of ancient Persia and its relevance to global patrimony. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Legacies of Ancient Persia. This week, we are doing something a little different than normal. This episode will be hosted by Dr. Marissa Stevens, the Assistant Director of the Portavood Institute. It has been a goal of ours to find a way to highlight the research of our Iranian Studies graduate students and introduce their work to a wider audience. Thus, we decided to have 5 grad students join us for a panel discussion that would allow them to chat with us and each other. We hope you enjoy learning about the work of the next generation of scholars of Iranian studies, and if you like what you hear, please give our show a 5-star rating and review us on Apple or Spotify.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Stevens, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Portavood Institute for the Study of the Iranian World. And we have a roundtable discussion today on the legacies of ancient Persia. Now, normally, Lexi Henning is your host, and she is here with us today, but she has entrusted me with interviewing some of our graduate students in a roundtable discussion on the future of Iranian studies. So with me today, we have Ethan, Emma, Charlotte, James, and Hong, and they are the 5 graduate students at UCLA that are in the program of Iranian studies focused on ancient Persia. Since they really are the future of Iranian studies, I thought who better to ask about the future of this discipline and what it may hold in the years to come. I'd like to start by having each of them introduce themselves very briefly, so you get to learn a little bit more about the talent we have here at UCLA. So Ethan, I'll start with you.
Hey, thank you, Marissa. My name's Ethan Friedland. I'm a third-year PhD student. My research interests are primarily in Iranian religious traditions. I work a lot with the Avesta. I'm learning Vedic Sanskrit this quarter. I'm also interested in Hebrew and, more importantly, Aramaic, the lingua franca of the Achaemenid Empire.
Emma?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Marissa. My name is, again, Emma, and I'm a 5th-year student in Iranian studies here at UCLA. Broadly, my interests are in the art history and archaeology of the Achaemenid Empire. In particular, I'm currently preparing my dissertation prospectus on the topic of the social institution of the feast in the Achaemenid Empire. So I'm really excited to get going on that and draw from previous research on the glyptic arts across the Near East, and especially the uninscribed tablets and seal imagery of the Persepolis fortification archive. So I look forward to talking with you all.
Charlotte?
Hello, thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, my name is Charlotte Howley. I'm a second year PhD student in the Iranian Studies program. And my area of focus is on gender within Achaemenid court culture and sort of connections with Neo-Assyrian court culture in the Mesopotamian world. And recently I've become very interested in placing court culture within the spatial context of the built space of the court.
James?
Hi, I'm James. I'm a second-year PhD student in Iranian studies, and my main research interest is in Achaemenid Central Asia and relations between Iran and the steppe in general.
And Hong?
Hi, thank you, Marissa. My name is Hong. I'm also a 5th-year PhD student at UCLA, and I'm a specialist of Achaemenid Egypt. I'm an Egyptologist by training, and I primarily focus on languages of the empire, as well as their precursors as well, and language development, linguistic interactions, religious development as visible through these developments in the language, and just people in general under sort of these authoritarian regimes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I couldn't help but notice the commonality between everything that you are studying is this interdisciplinarity, where beyond Iranian studies, there are things like gender studies, art history, Egyptology, and languages that we may not on the surface relate to Iranian studies, things like Hebrew and Aramaic and of course Egyptian, right? So all of you are really going beyond and studying, like the archaeology of the steppe, right? Which yes, is part of the Iranian world, but not necessarily where we would go first, right? When we think about ancient Persia. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that, how you all came to view, obviously, these interdisciplinary studies as being very critical, and where you think the intersection between Iranian studies and these other programs lie. Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you so much. And no, I think interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary study really is central to the study of the pre-Islamic Iranian world, because these states the Achaemenid Empire is sort of the first world empire. It touches so many different spheres. Persians appear in so many different source traditions. They're in Egyptian papyri, they're in classical Greek sources, they appear in the archaeology of Central Asia, they appear in Mesopotamia. And the fact is, traditionally, to my mind, the approach has always been each individual discipline approaches when Persians appear in their sources. And that really what we do and what the sort of UCLA program allows us to do is bring together this sort of synchronic perspective where we sort of look in these different source traditions where the Persians come up and sort of have them tell their own story rather than being defined by the disciplines that they appear tangentially within. And then there are, yes, different methodological perspectives you take too. But I think really what drew me to Iranian studies and to the UCLA program is just the ease with which you can engage with interdisciplinary study, and how, I can take classes on sort of, Old Persian and then Imperial Aramaic and Hebrew and Akkadian and Sumerian, and you can just jump between fields and chase the Persians wherever they go. And I think that's really exciting.
Emma, I know some scholars say that the Achaemenids really didn't even have so much of an art style of their own, but they just brought in all of these different art styles, right? From the Near East, from Egypt, from even further afield into the Indus Valley. Is that your experience? Do you have a way of identifying Achaemenid art beyond it being found in an Achaemenid context? Or are they truly interdisciplinary themselves?
That's such a good question, and one that we're really struggling with, I think, in the field as a whole. And it's such a hot topic right now because it's a really exciting time. Now we have access to so many new published materials, and we're able to really see how there was an effort really early on in the Achaemenid period to curate a particular so-called court style that is spread throughout the lands of the empire. By doing so, the extent of imperial rule was really spread throughout all of the imperial lands and even beyond. So from my point of view, I think that this is something that we really have to look forward to in the future of Iranian studies. And just to jump off of what Charlotte was saying earlier, I think it's a really special time not to be just here at UCLA and working within this particular cohort, but also we have all of these new conference series. It's really encouraging to see that the field is going in this new direction where we're all encouraged to explore new theories and methodologies, and we have access to so many new published works. So
yeah. And Hong, you are one that is doing not just Iranian studies, but also Egyptology, as you mentioned. And what is the connection there and the value between doing both? And just how do you divide your time?
Well, so interestingly, I actually came into this interdisciplinary thing almost entirely accidentally. I work on the Achaemenid period in Egypt because when I was an undergrad, I took the research seminar with Jacob Lauinger at Johns Hopkins University. The topic for the course at that time was biographies of the ancient Near East, right? And of course, one of these famous biographies we have from Egypt is the biography of Uja-Khwaraznet, which coincidentally is from the Persian period at almost the very beginning of Achaemenid domination of Egypt. So that really sort of drove me to want to understand more about this empire that tended to interact with different territorial units within itself very differently. And so while there are spaces within the empire where we can see an imperial impress, as we tend to call it nowadays, very more clearly, I should say, not very clearly, but more clearly than in others. In Egypt, for example, the art production of Egypt, it's very difficult for us to evaluate what is imperial and versus what is post-imperial or pre-imperial, simply due to the fact that if you look through our publications of the statues of the late period, you can't really tell the transition from the 26th to the 27th dynasty without some sort of a royal name. And I think that's fascinating, and why interdisciplinary work is very useful for a large empire like this. Because, of course, large polities don't deal with different peoples the same. And it's their strategies for interacting with different peoples that make these polities interesting and unique in their own ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think clearly in the administration and also in the languages, and I know a lot of you, I mean, well, all of you have to take a lot of languages, both ancient and modern. And I want to touch on that as well as maybe how it relates to the Achaemenid Empire, which seems to be a focus of all of you. We're very strong at UCLA in this time period, but you know, Ethan, you mentioned a few languages that you were working on, including like Hebrew and Aramaic. I think Akkadian you mentioned, or no, maybe I'm making that up. Someone's doing Akkadian. Charlotte, you're doing Akkadian. How are all of those languages intermixed in the Achaemenid Empire, and how is our language program, you know, maybe helping you untangle some of that?
Well, a fundamental problem of studying the Achaemenid period is that we don't have that many Iranian sources, at least in terms of Iranian sources on different topics beyond, you know, the day-to-day operation of a palace or something like that, which is fascinating, but does not tell us a lot about all the other aspects of life and governance and politics, etc. So yeah, it's inherent to the field in that we have to take on all these different other perspectives purely because there's no choice. So studying Aramaic is fascinating. There's lots of great Aramaic texts from the Achaemenid Empire, including letters, which are really exciting to get a slice of life between two people just living their life, whether they're more everyday people or they're high officials communicating. The Hebrew Bible is a lot like the Greek sources. It's rich in detail. They're exciting, interesting, sometimes romantic texts, deeply ideologically colored. And that's the second aspect of studying the Iranian world from the outside, as we so often have to do, is you have to understand what are the cultural tendencies and biases that these outside texts are bringing in that are shaping their understanding and their depiction of the Achaemenid.
And Charlotte, did you want to add something?
I think studying. I completely agree with everything Ethan said, and you do have to be so you have to be so careful, and you have to wear so many hats at once to sort of think about these different source traditions and their different biases that they bring in, and sort of how to account for that. But I think that learning so many languages at the same time and sort of being able to exist in this sort of interdisciplinary space can be really exciting, because you find things and points where things come together that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise consider. I mean, you sort of, I was talking just today with in Hebrew class about like the prevalence of connecting relatives in Aramaic and like similarities in the structure of Old Persian sentences. And these are obviously existing in an Old Persian context, and trace loan words throughout all of these, in Akkadian, in Aramaic, in Hebrew, and in Greek as well. You can really see how these languages interact in real time because you're studying them at the same time. Sort of dynamically, to my mind, shows these languages and these peoples are interacting, and how a really rich cultural interchange is taking place in this sort of world state.
I love how you said that we wear many hats. It's almost like every language requires its own hat and its own perspective with which to study it. And I want to put even one more hat onto James, because James, you did something really interesting this summer, which was do a Russian intensive. And so how does Russian fit in to all of this? And why did you do that? And tell me more about this.
I guess it's the product of studying the region we do and the many languages that have been and continue to be used. Yes, so I took an intensive Russian over the summer, and that's mainly because for the region that I study, Central Asia, it has been and continues to be dominated from the scholarly perspective by work that is written in Russian. Not a lot of that gets translated, and so not a lot of it gets into the wider scholarly sphere. And I think that happens a lot. And I think each of us, for our different hurdles of things, that we need to learn before we can access the material that we really want to look at.
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a very important point with access. And we can talk about access in terms of languages that need to be learned, both ancient and modern, and all of the hurdles involved in that. And then as well as physical access. And the most glaring elephant in the room is access to Iran. So I really want to touch on a lot of this, and I'll open the floor up to anyone that wants to comment. In terms of language acquisition, James, I really commend you doing this Russian intensive, but Persian, modern Persian is not necessarily a language that needs to be learned when you're studying ancient Persia. Is that correct?
Sure. Just a quick word. And I really know that Charlotte also has some strong opinions on this, but I would start by pushing back on that just a bit and really emphasizing that while it's not certainly as common, maybe even as it should be, and among this group in particular, it's something that we're all really interested in. And that I think in our cohort here, we see strongly that it's really important in time to pay attention to all of these different scholarly traditions that are really well informed, and recognize that there has been a notable lack of communication between those traditions in the past. And it's something that we're really trying to push back against.
Charlotte, please.
Yes, certainly. I think there has been a problem in the past in scholarship of not learning modern Persian and not engaging with modern Persian. I would say one of the most important languages for scholars of the pre-Islamic Iranian world to study, because on the one hand, despite the fact that access to Iran can be very, very difficult, there are vast cohorts of Iranian scholars who are doing incredible, very, very good work, especially archaeologically, but also historically. As James was saying with Russian, so little of it gets published in English, which means that us sort of in America, in sort of the Anglosphere, don't get to access this scholarship unless we access it in the original. And, when they're sort of discovering new archaeological discoveries all the time, like a new wall just got found at Tole Ajori, you can't read the language they're publishing it in, then you're really only getting half the picture. And another thing I would point out, there is a very passionate, very large diaspora community which is very passionate about these histories and these stories. And if we're not communicating with them, we're sort of losing a vast number of the people sort of more broadly who are very interested in this field. We need to engage with the sort of the broader public. And I think that's certainly an area that I think needs to be pursued more by scholarship. Modern Persian is fun, and the literature is fun, and there's interesting reception traditions and things. And yes, do modern Persian. It's great.
No, I mean, like, as an Egyptologist, we get the same frustration in our field. And I say our because we have Hong in the room here, right? As an Egyptologist, learning modern Arabic is not a requirement of, I don't think, any Egyptology program. And it's I think, a huge oversight.
No, I don't. I don't even think doing it in Cairo you would need to learn Arabic, per se.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite astonishing to think that. And I mean, and I'm guilty of this, right? I'm horrible with modern languages. And so I do not know Arabic, but it's something that I feel very self-conscious about and very guilty about not having learned that language. And I think it's so important to be able to communicate in the modern language of the area that you study. And especially, as you mentioned, Charlotte, not necessarily being able to go to Iran, or not easily, depending on your passport, your visa status, all of these things. You're not able to go often. And how did that impact, or did it impact, your decisions to enter the field of Iranian studies, knowing that you might not get to this place in the foreseeable future based on current political landscapes? Did that factor into any of your decisions?
Okay, I will speak simply because three of the most significant countries that I would travel to for my research are Iran, Afghanistan, and Russia, which together is not a great travel list. So at least for me, while going to these places, and there are certainly very stable places, relatively stable places in Central Asia, Iran and Afghanistan and Russia in particular, because it has quite a large collection of Scythian artifacts, and I study them. They're a step group. Going to these places was never something that I considered to be a viable possibility, at least in the immediate future. Obviously, I would love to go, but that's not why I'm here. I guess it's not for tourism. Not to be overly, dismissive.
Yeah, I think there is this huge disconnect between my current research and the physicality of Iran at the moment, which cannot be understated by everything that we've said. And I have this strange perspective where I had a Chinese passport until 2016. I gave up said Chinese passport for a passport that no longer allows me to go to most places in the Middle East for extended periods of time. While there is a level of regret, perhaps, in that I now do not have access, if I wanted to say, look at Bisatun in its geographical landscape, or look at the plains of Khuzestan in person to sort of see the dichotomy between the mountains and the plains. These sorts of really important geophysical contexts that the ancient Iranians would have had as they navigated their landscape. I also understand that sort of how scholarship has to work. There are always limitations imposed upon one scholarship, whether that be social, political, economic, and so forth. This is simply one of them, and the best we can hope for at this point is perhaps we can go to any of these places that we would like to go in the future. And until then, we do the best with what we have access to. Be that, 50-year-old archaeological reports or modern published Iranian archaeological expedition notes.
Following that too, my area of expertise is actually kind of the so-called heartland region in Iran. And I would love to go. And since I work on material culture and I consider myself to be an archaeologist, maybe more of a historian at this point, but it's interesting because in a way, I've always been really passionate about the material, of course, but it certainly has shaped my graduate career and my ongoing and prospective career in the future. While I love the archaeology, I only have access to what's been published so far, and I would love to excavate, of course, but some of these things are just kind of off limits, I guess, for the time being, and therefore now I do characterize myself maybe more so a historian than an archaeologist, and I love all the material, but it's just sort of a fact that we all have to contend with, I think, at this point in time.
I would just say that one of my major motivations for pursuing this field in the first place was, as I think quite a lot of us here were, I originally was a classicist. I studied, the Greco-Roman world. And what really frustrated me with classics, with the classics course at Oxford, my undergrad, was how much the Persians featured in the narrative, but how little engagement there was from either the source traditions or the scholarship in the Iranian world on its own terms. It was always, the Persians come in and they burn Athens and then they disappear again, and then Alexander the Great goes and smashes them. And it was always, it always frustrated me that, they were so dominant in the narrative, but it was always an outside imposed view. And yes, there are various problems with access to Iran, and that is incredibly frustrating. But the fact is, if we don't study it, then, if we don't study it, who will? Who will focus on these incredibly important histories, and who will bring these narratives that generally, traditionally, have not been focused on into the broader sort of context of global antiquity? There are problems, but that doesn't mean we should ignore them. we have to work harder to do it, but I think that makes it all the more worthwhile when we can sort of recontextualize these narratives. And I would say, with some of the stuff I've been doing, there's plenty of material that still remains to be published even here. The fact that the difficulty of going to Iran just lends focus on what we have to do, what we can do, and that's what we have to put effort into, and doing the best we can with what we have.
I'll add that as ancient historians, regardless of the field, we're always scrounging for sources. And so the inability to go to Iran is just, one other stumbling block for us. And it's, it can be overcome.
So, Charlotte, I loved how you said that you were once a classicist and then you saw the light, right? So I want to do a quick lightning round with all five of you. What is one thing the Greek historians got wrong? Like, what is the most glaring thing they got wrong about the Persians?
I could probably flip to any page of Herodotus right now, and there will be one wrong thing on that page.
From my perspective, or one of the biggest things they get wrong is they're sort of looking at the sources, the way they treat royal women is really fascinating and so bloody wrong. Because they're, on the one hand, they're like, these tropes of sort of the women, they're just enchained in their harem, and they're never allowed outside. And then on the other hand, but they're ruled by the women, and they're so effeminate by being ruled by the women. And the fact is, they're just fundamentally misunderstanding, to my mind, how the court works. What it is, from how I conceive of it, it's two separate courts with people of immense power acting royally on both sides. And, they just can't wrap their head around as sort of Athens, this horrifying slave society with the, women not being allowed to leave the house. They can't conceive of women acting on their own, on their own sort of royal initiative and, controlling these vast numbers of people. And the fact that the women's court is just this alternative society that exists just in parallel to the men's court. Women act as, they sign orders, they own land, they grant mortgages, they have their own tables, their own feasts. And they are far more than just these sort of jealous property, jealously guarded property that they appear as in Plutarch.
So treatment of women, that's one thing they got wrong in terms of their impressions of women. Ethan, how about you?
Yeah, I'll start early because I am, I think, the only one who wasn't a classics major, so I have less material to run on and I don't want it to be exhausted. A classic case is the Greek translation of various Achaemenid concepts. A famous one is the concept bandika, in Persian, a bondsman of sort, right? The way you would describe someone's relationship to their king. And the Greeks often translate this as doulos, meaning slave. Through this mistranslation, the Greeks present a very interesting concept of the Achaemenid Empire as a relationship of everyone is a slave to the king, and that is certainly not how the Persians or any of their subjects would either describe themselves or like to be described, I'm sure.
All right, Emma, how about you?
Sure. One thing that we've really been dealing a lot with in our recent graduate seminars has been kind of dealing with alterity that exists between the classical world and the ancient Iranian world, and their characterization of the Persian kings as being these kind of despotic, like Charlotte was saying, effeminate rulers. And in their way, like they were characterizing them as extremely other and foreign and, to their mind, ineffective. So that's something that I've been really pushing back on in my work and trying to recontextualize these narratives that we have from the classical sources and kind of glean the kernels that are most helpful out of them, that are still viable, and kind of put them more into dialogue with Persian sources. So I'm looking at how the classical authors talk about the practices of the Persian feast. And we don't have any of that. There's a scarcity of material from the Persian side of things, and we don't actually get internal depictions of what this looked like. I know that's kind of a half answer. I think they did get a lot of things wrong. And at the same time, we're forced still to work with this material and reintegrate it with the knowledge that we now know that is from within the bounds of the empire.
And I think studying a lot of those Greek texts shines a lot of light on the meaning behind what they're writing, as long as you understand it from that biased perspective, right? So there is a lot to be gained, but you just have to be very conscious of that bias. James, how about you? What's the one thing the Greeks got wrong about the Persians?
So I'm having a hard time thinking of this Persian one. I have a story about Scythians that they get wrong that I find amusing, but otherwise I don't have anything.
Well, I'll take it. I'll hear your story about the Scythians.
Okay, it's not from Herodotus. I think it's from Eriswater's Places, which is a Hippocratic Greek medical treatise. And if you ever want an eyebrow-raising read, just read an ancient Greek medical treatise. The Scythians, who live in sort of modern Ukraine, and then that extends east to into Central Asia, they have a big culture of tattooing themselves. And we actually have some very wonderful examples of even human skin that has been preserved, because a lot of Scythian tombs are very far north, and so they survive. But the Greeks don't really understand what the Scythians are doing when they tattoo themselves. So the Hippocratic author claims that it has to do with the weather, and that where the Scythians live is very cold and very wet. And they argue that somehow makes their skin really loose, and so they need to like tighten it up, and the way they do that is by like scarring themselves, and that's how they explain tattooing. And it's just which could not be further from the truth, but it's an interesting anecdote.
I love it and I hate it.
It's like they've never been anywhere else in the world where they tattoo.
Yeah. Okay. So Hong, I want to jump to you. Did you think of one?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about sort of how the Greeks conceptualized other people in these types of texts. Not every Greek did not know a Persian, but it's very clear based on how Persians are depicted in Greek art, in Greek drama, of what Greek people, Greek artists believe that the Greek population believe Persians to be, which are always these horse-riding, bearded men wielding their akinakis with some sort of like tied horse tail behind them. And it is only this sort of a depiction that ends up most of the time in their artwork. And then you wonder why the Greek populace has this really weird way of viewing Persians as despotic, horse-riding people coming from the East.
And Charlotte, you wanted to add?
Yes, no, I wanted to add, given that James brought up Airs, Waters and Places, there's a fun part in that specific text again. It is a Scythian thing. They mention in both Herodotus and in Airs, Waters, Places, they mention the Scythians have these priests called the Enares. They occupy a liminal space between male and female, dedicants of the god. And basically, I think Herodotus says they are cursed by a Syrian god for Astarte, for destroying their temple. Whereas Airs, Waters and Places says is that they ride horses so much, their lower anatomy, shall we say, is overheated and crushed almost by the riding on the horses. This is why they are cursed with effeminacy.
All these crazy horse people coming from the East and their weird anatomies.
Yes, but no, and really what we have here is just very much something in the same vein as these sort of third-gendered cult servants, third-gendered religious figures that we have in the Mesopotamian world, the Kalagalu, and you see this in Anatolia with the Galos priests of Kaibili as well. And these Inares are operating in exactly this same sort of gender liminal space where the liminality is then reflected in sort of religious power. And it's what the Greeks see, what is this sort of pan ancient Near Eastern into sort of pan Central Asian even tradition of people who exist beyond the binary, and them having both religious and social power. And they're like, horse people ride too much horses, and then their things get crushed, and that's why they're all effeminate. And it's just a beautiful misunderstanding, I think, of a very interesting.
This is so wonderful. Their explanations for saggy skin, for alternative gendered individuals that they might come across. This is all so hilarious. I want to turn slightly and highlight something else that all of you do, because you talked a lot about your research and your studies, the types of classes that you've taken. But our graduate students at UCLA do a lot more than that. They often teach, they often hold research positions, sometimes at different institutions, and have affiliations with those institutions as well as UCLA. So I'd love for you to maybe share some of those experiences that you have, and how they tie into your studies and how you integrate them into your life as a graduate student.
I've held positions at various institutions while I've been a graduate student here at UCLA, including the Getty Research Institute, and also formerly the Oriental Institute, which is now the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, West Asia and North Africa. I think of this kind of more in context of what we had been talking about earlier, as in we're really encouraged here at UCLA to work with our colleagues across different disciplines and fields and really kind of make these more wide-reaching connections. So I feel really fortunate to be supported in that, both here at UCLA, and have made such wonderful connections in outside institutions as well. So it makes for a busy schedule, certainly, but I find that these things actually work together surprisingly well and have enriched me in my understanding of the ancient past. So now that I'm trying to sit down and kind of synthesize what I've learned so far, actually write this dissertation prospectus, I'm finding it's kind of surprising how many things actually kind of work their way in.
And yes, no, I completely agree with what Emma's saying. No, I mean, I think I again, with a lot of the stuff I do with other universities, it's very much about developing these sort of interdisciplinary connections, and having these conversations with scholars in other fields who provide perspectives that you might not necessarily have considered. 2 weeks ago now, I guess, I was giving an international joint lecture, Hebrew Bible graduate student at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, called Ru Yingji. And yeah, she is an excellent scholar, and she was looking at the Book of Esther from its perspective in the Hebrew Bible, and sort of connections with the Feast of Belshazzar, and connections with sort of the Joseph narrative, and like these sort of feasting things there. Then I was sort of bringing in this sort of Achaemenid court culture context, and also bringing in the context of the built space from the archaeological reports from Susa. And together we had such an interesting interdisciplinary conversation, and it really is sort of working with these scholars in these different places. It provides unique perspectives that you wouldn't consider. It benefits both fields by having people working with this. And then also, it's different sort of scholarly perspectives, different, university cultures can impact the way you deal with scholarship. I mean, I'm doing stuff at the moment as well, and their work on Zoroastrianism, but I'm working on a book chapter with them. And the way that SOAS does things is there's a lot of engagement with Zoroastrianism as a lived religion, and sort of engagement with these diaspora communities, especially the Parsi community in India, where, they are living and practicing the religion that we study in a much, much earlier period. And it's about they're really pushing the boundaries of emic and etic perspectives, combining the two, both insider and outsider perspectives. I think working not only with people in different fields, but people in different institutions with different perspectives can really enrich our own scholarship, and we can hopefully enrich theirs too.
No, absolutely. All of these connections that can be made with different institutions, I think, are so important, especially moving forward where everything is becoming much more global. Yeah, Ethan?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on, because you brought up teaching, and it's important to note, because I mean, all of us here at UCLA as grad students, we pay our way through by teaching. That's how we get paid, and that's what also pays for our tuition, etc. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating because we want to focus on our research, right? But teaching really is a wonderful thing, and it's fun. And that's really what academia is all about, is, educating students, even not just with the general facts of our field, but the skill sets, the analytical skills that they require, the critical skills, the communicative skills. It's nice. It's important, but yes, it is something that we all do every year constantly. And so a huge part of our life here and our time here is teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I know as a grad student, I taught most quarters, and it is true. I always told my students, that rather than teaching you facts about ancient history, which I am going to do, and I hope you like, but beyond that, to teach you, like you said, Ethan, those skills that are useful no matter what career path you choose, things like writing skills, understanding diversity and inclusion, right? These are the types of things that we can teach through the ancient world as a case study, right? And so that's kind of the way I always frame classes that I taught to my students. What are some of the classes that you guys have taught?
Me personally, I've taught women in power in the ancient world, a class on Jerusalem, and year after year, I'm teaching a class on Achaemenid civilization and the Empire of Alexander, which is always a lot of fun. And like you were saying, Marissa, it's always interesting because these are topics we're all so interested in as graduate students, but our sections a lot of times in those three classes in particular that I taught, we're all writing two classes. So a lot of times in section, we're really using these the course material and the actual content to teach these skills that are transferable even to students who are majoring in kind of in topics outside of the humanities. So
yeah, I mean, just to add to your list, because I'm an Egyptologist, I also teach classes like ancient Egyptian religion, history of ancient Egypt from the pre-dynastic to the New Kingdom. And, you know, all of these topics are very interesting. And because they're not writing two courses, rather than teaching writing skills, what I end up having to teach is critical thinking skills, really questioning the things that you are taught, even as I'm teaching them to you. That's sort of something that I want all students to develop as they finish with their college education, because that's, I think, something that is critical. That's relatively the goal, right? Is by having better education through these sort of humanities courses, these students should theoretically be more holistic human beings as they exit the university system, and thereby improving the quality of our mutual societal unit that we form as a collective. And doing that through ancient Egypt and talking about pyramids and whether there were slaves that built the pyramids, and, you know, why alien theory about anything in the ancient world is so problematic. That's all interesting, and it teaches students to sort of think as they are engaging with set of misinformation accessible readily at their fingertips on the internet.
Yeah, I would add to that teaching ancient history is not only just a fun way to teach these critical thinking skills, but often the students find it easier to be critical about something that is so distant that they do not have emotional connections to or anything like that. So I can put up Herodotus on the screen for my students, and the students can feel comfortable tearing it apart, picking apart the biases, understanding like what is behind every little aspect, where they might not be so comfortable doing that with, say, a news article today or something coming from the government or whatever. And the students still need these analytical skills. They need to think critically, and I hope overly critically, hypercritically.
Yeah, I completely agree. Hong, I'm going to put you on the spot with a question that's going to get you in trouble, but I just have to know, what do you like teaching better, Egypt or Persia?
When I taught the history of the Sasanians, that was one of the most fun courses I ever had the opportunity to sort of sit down, listen to the lectures, and sort of grade all the papers and so forth, and interact with the students about the history, because that's something that I was not personally very well educated in. And so it was also a learning opportunity for me. And it also opened me up to different viewpoints that I sort of never had to engage with if I kept teaching Egyptology courses forever and ever. Of course, ancient Egypt and ancient Persia somehow end up being thought about differently by the populations that live in those geophysical spaces today. I will say teaching ancient Persia probably is a bit more fun because you can talk about more things in general.
Yeah, no, that was the right answer for this podcast, but we can talk more later. Emma?
I think too, going off of what Ethan said earlier, it reminded me there's really so much to say. We can really encourage in these ancient history classes our students to really delve deeper into these kind of broader issues that still are very much on our minds for the modern world. And like Hong said, in the Iranian world, there's a lot really to do with this. So one of the things that came to my mind as we were all talking was in the Achaemenid civilization class that I talk about. When we get to Alexander's conquest, we spend a lot of time kind of asking the students to consider what they think about the so-called Eastern world versus the Western world and how Alexander is connected to all of this. And a year after I initially taught that course, I also taught Making the Modern Middle East. It's fun to see students who take certain classes really kind of expand upon their knowledge and still, even though they're outside of the humanities, maybe come back and be able to apply this to their own lives and their own majors. And like Ethan said, maybe in a way that feels more safe or comfortable to them, they can push back on these ideas and consider, why do I think that there's this divide between the East and West? And why does it persist today? And kind of how can we come to a better understanding of what's really going on and connect with our fellow humans across the world?
Right. And I think, so much of these classes really do bring that relevance to the ancient world. Maybe not in a direct way or a way that students necessarily expect, but hopefully it does come full circle. Lexi, did you want to?
How we perceive Persia without talking about 300 and other mediums of reception. So, I've got to go there. So for you guys who are actually studying it, is this a film that you liked and have learned to hate? Did you always hate it? Would you use it in classes to teach, even critically? Is it something you'd like to stay away from? Like, how do you guys feel about it since you're actually the ones who have to study this?
Oh, there's so many of you that are just waiting to answer. Go for it, guys. Ethan, you first.
So I sort of have two responses to this because at the surface level, I mean, the movie is absurd, right? It's like these oiled up naked men fighting for democracy against like the monstrous Tolkien-esque forces of the East. Obviously, it's not accurate. And it represents the time that it comes from, right? This is a movie in 2007 when America is, freshly engaged in these wars. And there is this West versus East idea. And so 300 engages very liberally in all these stereotypes about the East that have developed for a very, very long time. I do like your idea of teaching it because these things that seem so distant are in fact regularly part of our life. And some of these biases are so baked in that we don't even think about it. And so, of course, when they were making this movie, they weren't thinking about it at all. And they were saying, this is exactly how we'll represent the Persians. This is a normal way to do so. This is a normal way to frame things. So yeah, I mean, it's a great example of like trying to understand a text, what inspires it, what are the biases and maybe even neuroses behind it.
James, you look like you want to say something, that I'll hop to Charlotte.
I find 300 fascinating for those reception reasons, for the fact that it's a particular time interpreting a different time, which is always very interesting, especially to look back on. And while I am in no way a fan of Zack Snyder as a director, I do wonder, because and I think it's difficult not knowing the intentionality, but I think there is something to be said for a portrayal like this if it's more self-conscious, if it knows that is what it's engaging in. And I genuinely do not know if that is the case with 300 because it is so, half of me hates the movie because it's so inaccurate, but the other half is like, but if it is in fact some kind of meta reference to the way the Greeks themselves may have viewed the conflict, if you think of like the heroic nude, which was a thing.
I don't think it's anywhere near as intelligent or intentional as that.
I'm giving a very large benefit of the doubt, but
I'm somewhere kind of in between. I personally love teaching 300 or at least bringing it up to spur on discussion in my classes. Although, like you were saying, James, I'm finding that less and less students have actually seen it at this point. So it's making me feel quite old or very much the historical nerd. I think it's funny that you bring up the heroic nude because that's actually in the context that I like to kind of actually bring up the movie or certain posters and things, is consider how since antiquity these kind of Hellenocentric media and understanding of the so-called East has really kind of permeated our mindset and how we studied and understood Iranian culture. And so I really like to bring that up for discussion. And then I usually also try and talk about kind of Greek propaganda that was kind of coming out shortly thereafter, after the Persian Wars broke out, and ask my students, so what do you think about this? Is this a way we can push back on our modern understandings of what was going on the ancient world and question our own perspectives. So I look at the Eurymedon vase, which has a Greek soldier depicted in the heroic nude attacking a Persian soldier. And in that way, I think it's a really kind of instructive way to get students to think about their own biases and how even in the modern day, we're still surrounded by all of this information that is kind of characterizing the Persian world as this other.
Go for it. Whoever's next, Charlotte.
I think 300 is becoming less and less relevant. One of the most interesting things about 300, its reception of the ancient world through the lens of Western modern toxic masculinity. Because obviously you have these nearly naked, oiled up Spartan figures that are sort of these heroic defenders of freedom. Both the comics and Zack Snyder's film are very clear to emphasize that all of these figures are straight. You know, the one sex scene in that film is a straight sex scene. And you know, despite the fact that these are nearly naked, oiled up men who are clearly aggressively eroticized and they are based on this heroic nude, the film completely straight washes all of these characters. And then the one character in this film is Xerxes. He says, and I made Xerxes this 7-foot-tall god king who wants to have sex with you as the audience member. And that I made it, he said, I made it specifically to make the straight men in the audience uncomfortable. And then you're like, but no, the Persians, they're the gay ones. Binary understandings of gender and sexuality do not apply very much to the ancient world. It's just, I think, very interesting that they heap all of this queerness on the enemy when really both sides are engaging in it.
No, I never really thought of it like that, but you're right that they use queerness as yet one more way of otherizing. We could spend hours picking apart all of the problems with that. Hong, you're the only one that hasn't had a chance to speak about 300 yet. Do you want to add anything?
I just would like to add that the fact that this movie that came out in 2007 is one of the most important cornerstones of our discipline's cultural impacts on modern society is incredibly disappointing. And if somebody would like to write an ancient Persia blockbuster film, please do so. We need a good one.
I agree with that. You're absolutely right.
Something that's actually quite odd is the Alexander the Great movie from, I think, the 50s is perhaps the most accurate of all the Hollywood depictions of the Achaemenid Empire. No one talks about that because no one liked it. So that's why that's more recent than 300, but does not have the cultural power.
Game of Thrones has one eunuch. Well, I suppose there were the Unsullied as well, sure. But like you want a whole load of eunuchs. Ancient Near Eastern court culture and Persian court culture has got you covered. They are very beautiful according to the sources.
I wanted my last question to sort of be this open-ended, where do you see the discipline headed? But to be perfectly honest, I like the direction you're taking it. I think our audience will too, right? So I'll ask a slightly different question, which is, where would you all like to go? So if you could construct sort of like your dream position post grad school after you've graduated, where would you like to be and what type of a job? And even if it is the traditional professor route, specifically, what would you like to be able to teach, or what type of research project would you like to take on in that? What do you think's most needed for Iranian studies?
I don't have a specific position I really want in mind, because for me, all I really would like to do is to continue my research, right? Something that gives me the ability to continue working on texts, writing articles about religious history, religious development, talking about Persia and Egypt. And I think helping continue to make sure that people learn about Egypt and Persia from a credible source, and B, an interesting one. Because I think that is what this discipline has lacked in many ways. Is we have a lot of resources for sort of learning about ancient Persia. And that's just gotten better with the internet, right? We can access information about ancient Persia readily. But presenting that in an interesting way for a modern audience in the 2020s is very different from how that information would have been presented even 10 years ago. And I think that needs to be a shift that we undergo in this discipline so that more awareness can be made about sort of what we are learning about the Persians, how they are contributing to how our lives are lived, and why the Persians themselves are interesting or cool or have some amount of bearing upon your everyday life. Probably not. But apparently people think about the Roman Empire once a week. So we're doing something wrong, but classics is doing right.
Someone needs to come up with a survey of ancient Persia and how often we think about that. That's next. But yeah. Charlotte, how about you? What are you thinking dream job wise?
Sort of be, I guess the sort of more traditional professor route, I guess. But what I'd really want to do is work out what's going on and teach, discuss, and really focus on what's going on with gender. I think there are so many interesting different things going on, and there are so many different cultural influences: the Mesopotamian, the Zoroastrian, the to some degree even the classical, the Anatolian, the Egyptian. It's this vast swathe of the ancient world which really impacts everywhere else. The way that the others engage with it is so gendered. And yet no one really, and certainly with no degree of, or with not enough methodological sort of sophistication, looks at what's going on with gender in the Iranian world. And that's what I want to do.
I think this question is especially fun because the job market, at least in academia, is so almost bleak. So I've never really thought about that because kind of like the two others that have gone before me, I would also love eventually to be a professor, to continue on teaching and researching. I'm open to where that is and what that looks like. My heart kind of lies in teaching. So I would love to continue on working with undergraduate students. And something I think that I would really love to contribute is perhaps broadening our perspectives and doing something along the lines of kind of what we have in place here, but a consistent kind of survey that considers different Iranian eras, maybe looking at Achaemenid Empire, following our Sassanids and Sasanians as well, and putting that in context to really make it more accessible to undergraduate students is something that I would love to do in the future. So hopefully that'll happen.
Ideally, I would like to see myself as a professor somewhere, but if you pay me to do research, I would be very happy. Ideally, I think some of the Russian scholarship, because there is recent events and with the Soviet Union and things like that, the scholarly worlds between the Russophone and non-Russophone, there's a large gap there.
Desired jobs, anything that pays. In terms of the future of the field, I think here, Iranian studies, Near Eastern studies, whatever, it just falls under the humanities. And I think that we need to be teaching more humanities. I think we need to be investing more in the humanities and the skills of qualitative analysis, critical thinking skills, things like that come with the humanities. And right now, the tendency in this country is to not do that, is to cut costs, cut spending. And I don't think it's working out that great. And so I hope that, our priorities in spending as a country change to really invest in the future, invest in educating students in something that's well-rounded and prepares them to be a dutiful citizen in a democracy. So that being said, I'd love to play a small part by, teaching. I'd love to teach Iranian religions. I'd love to teach the Achaemenids, and teach language.
No, Ethan, I think you said it so well. I completely agree. That the humanities are incredibly important, and it is up to us on a federal level to make sure that it gets the support it needs. And I also really want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us, with Lexi and I, to do this roundtable discussion. And I hope the audience has enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed recording it, and you will be hearing a lot more from our graduate students because we will be having them guest host some upcoming episodes of the podcast. We've tasked them all with thinking about someone that they would really love to sit down with and have a conversation, right? And we're going to do everything to get that connection made and make sure that they can have that conversation. And so you'll be hearing more from them in the future with those episodes, and we hope you tune in for those as well. So with that, thank you all so much.
For anyone who is interested or maybe interested in, what kinds of things you guys are publishing or, any kind of upcoming projects that you're doing, I want to open the space up for anyone to sort of cite any academia pages or social media where people can go and find you guys.
Oh, you can find me on academia at Hangyu Chat. That's very simple.
I guess I would point you first maybe to my NELC page, the NELC departmental website at UCLA. I have my academia page linked there and my CV. So there's a couple publications and things, but that's where my overview is.
Same, yeah, the NELC page, and I also have an academia.edu, and yes, Charlotte Howley at NELC, Charlotte Howley, academia.edu.
No academia page, Ethan Friedland on UCLA's website. You can find me. Thank you.
James?
I should, in theory, be on UCLA's website, although I don't think I am on there yet. So that's a me problem, but it's fine.
We'll make sure to get it up before this episode airs.
Well, thank you everyone so much. And this has been a lot of fun. And I'm sure that people are going to be looking forward to the episodes that each of you will be guest hosting. So thank you to all our listeners who have been listening to this episode. And we hope you will join us in 2 weeks. Legacies of Ancient Persia is a Portavood podcast production, hosted and edited by Lexi Henning, with select episodes co-hosted by Marissa Stevens. Cover art provided by Hadley Leesman and original music by Brent Arhart. Established in 2017 as the premier research center for the study of ancient Iran, the mission of the Portavood Institute for the Study of the Iranian World is to engage in transformative research on all aspects of Iranian antiquity, including its reception in the medieval and modern periods, by expanding on the traditional domains of old Iranian studies and promoting cross-cultural and interdisciplinary scholarship. Thanks for listening to our show. It's available to stream on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Portavood Institute and at Portavood UCLA, or visit our website portavood.ucla.edu. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and review us. For podcast inquiries or questions about the Portavood Institute, please email us at portavoodpodcastproduction@gmail.com. We'll see you next time as we continue our deep dive into the legacies of ancient Persia.